being a grassroots organization is a lot of fun. It's a lot of hard work, as we all know. Mm-hmm. But you and I both started in 2009. My first week on the job was the week that Obama was sworn in. Mm-hmm. So you think about what happened in the subsequent weeks and months. The very first thing was a stimulus plan that they introduced, and then you had cap and trade, you had card check, and then, of course, ultimately healthcare. And so it was a lot of hard work, but at the same time, if we just put together grassroots events, people showed up.
Right.
Because they were tired of yelling at the television.
Yeah.
And they wanted to come to our event. We were that partner. We were that voice that they could, get all of their frustrations out, but most importantly, really take action, really contact their members of Congress or state legislatures or whoever it may be. But it was good old-fashioned grassroots that really, there was a lot of great work done from 04 to 09. But once Obama took office, that's when everything really took off because of all the threats.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
All right, well, thanks for joining us for another episode of American Potential. The year was 2004, and a lot of things happened that year. George W. Bush was reelected. Facebook was launched, the final episode of Friends aired, and Americans for Prosperity was started by stopping a tax increase in the state of Kansas. Over the past 20 years, Americans for Prosperity, or AFP, has grown from being a grassroots organization in one state to now having a presence in all 50 states, as well as merging with two other organizations, Libre and Concerned Veterans for America. Now, some of the big wins over the years would be getting the VA Missions Act passed, cutting taxes and regulations, offering school choice for students in different states, just to name a few. But what are the stories behind all of these accomplishments? Well, for this episode, we want to talk to some of the longest employed employees at Americans for Prosperity. So I want to welcome Derrick Sontag, who is Vice President of Grassroots for Americans for Prosperity, and Annie Patnaude, who is the Michigan State Director for AFP. Now, Derrick has been with AFP since 2009, and he started out as the Kansas State Director. Annie started in 2006, and she started as the press secretary. And I have been with Americans for Prosperity since 2009, and I started out as a Colorado State Director for AFP. So anyway, Derrick, Annie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you bet. So it's been quite a ride 20 years ago. And I'm going to start with you, Derrick, because you really kind of were around at the founding of this thing. You're from Kansas. That's the birthplace, if you will, of Americans for Prosperity. Tell us how it all kind of started.
Well, first of all, I've been sitting here for the last minute trying to recall the last episode of Friends and how it ended. But I think Ross and Monica ended up together. Or Rachel.
So. Rachel.
I can't remember. Right. Anyway, so that's the more important thing. But no, when you think back to 2004, I hadn't started working for AFP yet, but our good friend Alan Cobb, who was the first ever state director for Americans for Prosperity, him and a couple of folks in Wichita got together and decided that they needed to start a grassroots movement. Our governor at the time, Kathleen Sebelius, who later went to Health and Human Services under Obama and built great websites for Obamacare and all that fun stuff. But Sebelius proposed increasing the property, income, and sales taxes all at once. Yeah. That was her state of the state, basically. Increase all of those taxes so they could spend more money. And so because what AFP is at the end of the day, which is that grassroots voice that empowers Americans, they knew that in order to really effectively stop that tax increase and in order to pass reforms in subsequent years, that they needed to launch a grassroots movement in Kansas. And so it began in early 2004, and shortly thereafter, you had North Carolina and you had Texas come along as well as state chapters, and then here we are 20 years later, like you said, a presence in all 50 states.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Annie, how did you get started with the organization?
Yeah, so I grew up in northern Indiana, moved out to D.C., jobless, homeless. I worked for National Taxpayers Union for a while, And I saw this job posted for this grassroots organization doing communications work.
Right.
And I applied. It was a very small group. We were located in downtown DC on M Street.
Yep.
And I remember getting the interview and thinking, I'm going to do this. Press secretary. That sounds really exciting. I think I was not even old enough to rent a vehicle at the time. So when we traveled, we always had to bring somebody who was older with us so that they could legally rent a car. And it was really exciting work. And I think we really felt like we were pioneers to some degree, taking on wasteful federal spending.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as I look back on it, did you think, what is this organization like today? It's kind of most everybody in the conservative movement knows who Americans for Prosperity is, right? So we've got a brand. But back then, I mean, Annie, were you like, who are these people?
Not only was I saying who are these people, and I thought it was super fun and exciting, but the national media didn't know us.
Right.
Here I am making cold pitch calls, and I remember talking to the Associated Press reporter, and I can't say it on air, but he said, who the F is Americans for Prosperity and why the H should I care?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, within a couple years, they knew who we were and we had a voice. And it was exciting to be able to build that. And fast forward a couple years from that point, the national reporters didn't say that anymore. They knew exactly who we were. And we took some flack for it. Yeah. My grandpa was served on a B-17 during World War II. He said, if you're not taking flack, you're not over the target. And if you are, you're over the target. And so the media knew who we were after just a short period of time.
Yeah. Derrick, this Americans for Prosperity, particularly at the time that it was founded, it was kind of the Tea Party movement and other things starting to take shape way back then even. But your thoughts on like giving voice to average citizens. I mean, that's what the value of AFP, particularly in the early years was, right? Was to be able to give a voice to people who were just very frustrated with what they saw happening in government.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the exciting part. I mean, that being a grassroots organization is a lot of fun. It's a lot of hard work, as we all know. But you and I both started in 2009. My first week on the job was the week that Obama was sworn in. So you think about what happened in the subsequent weeks and months. The very first thing was the stimulus plan that they introduced, and then you had cap and trade, you had card check, and then, of course, ultimately healthcare. And so it was a lot of hard work, but at the same time, if we just put together grassroots events, people showed up. Right. Because they were tired of yelling at the television. Yeah. And they wanted to come to our event. We were that partner. We were that voice that they could, get all of their frustrations out, but most importantly, really take action, really contact their members of Congress or state legislatures or whoever it may be. But it was good old-fashioned grassroots that really, there was a lot of great work done from 2004 to 2009, but once Obama took office, that's when everything really took off because of all the threats coming from the federal government, right? More so than usual.
Yeah. So I look back on it. I started in 2009. You actually interviewed me. I started as a Colorado State director, but they asked me if I would help put together some bus tours. And so I said, sure, I'll do that. So I was a contractor for several months, and they just we'd finish one bus tour and then they'd go, oh, by the way, we got another bus coming in the next week. Would you keep doing this? And it became like, well, maybe we should just hire a state director. So I had to fly out to Kansas City and I met with you and Alan Cobb.
Yeah, I remember that.
At the barbecue place. Was it Arthur Bryant's barbecue? I think it might have been.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Does it sound right? At the airport in Kansas City. I never left the airport. Flew in, met with you guys, left, and I was like, what is this? What kind of organization is this? And by the time I landed, I turned my phone back on and I had a voicemail from Alan Cobb, like, hey, give us a call. That was kind of the HR process back then.
Yeah. No, he was ready. He went against my wishes, but you. No, he was ready. So yeah,
that's right.
I remember that day well.
You wondered why you were even there after all of that. Okay, let's just take the niceties off and let's just talk about some of the amazing things that have happened. Okay, I'll give you a chance to think about this, Annie, but I'm going to put you on the spot because you took that shot at me. What's thinking back, like what's the craziest thing that you can think of that happened at that's happened at AFP over the, now keep in mind,
Well, okay.
just forget the lawyers.
This is going to be,
you know what I mean?
This actually is going to
Just
be
forget them.
aired and published, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean,
We're going to have to do this without legal review, but it's okay.
Are we? Okay. So I wouldn't say that there's a single craziest thing that comes to mind. I mean, the craziest time period we just talked about, and that was 2009 and on once Obama was sworn in, but it was the bus tours for me in general. And, you know, we're a state-based operation, right? We had about 20 state chapters at the time. And so for me, it was taking time away from Kansas to hop on a bus to go through Iowa and states like Indiana because we didn't have a state chapter yet, and doing all of those crazy events where sometimes you had 5 people show up, sometimes you had 100 people show up in the middle of Iowa, and you had no idea why, but that was the exciting part. And then on the Iowa, the Hands Off My Healthcare tour that we did across Iowa, I had a German film crew with me, and they didn't really speak English that well. The interviewer kind of did.
Why did you have a German film crew?
Because someone from headquarters said, "Hey, there's a German film crew that's going to be with you."
Okay.
And because my last name's Sontag, I don't know, maybe, but there you go.
Oh, and they were doing a story from like a German perspective of American politics.
They were doing a documentary, and I was the one on the bus representing AFP. We had someone from 60 Plus on there, and I just would always say Obamacare is bad. I mean, but I had no idea half the time what they were saying to me, but they would film, and then we would have idle chat, introduce them to Burger King, places like that. So that was kind of a crazy week or so in Iowa, and that documentary, I have no idea if it ever aired or not, or perhaps I'm a huge star in Germany.
You probably are.
You know, David Hasselhoff.
David Hasselhoff. I was going to say, you're the new David Hasselhoff.
But that was a crazy time. It's a crazy experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Annie, how about you? What's the craziest thing you recall?
Boy, that is really
I know it's a loaded question.
tough one.
I get it.
That's a really tough one. So in 2006, when we launched the Ending Earmarks Express, we traveled all over the country, 15,000 miles, 50 earmarks, including the Bridge to Nowhere. But we had an ABC Nightline news producer who rode along with us. He got to see the way events are made and all the crazy grassroots. And it really resulted, though, in our first big national news hit. And he called us a small, scrappy nonprofit.
Love it.
And it was really a great guy. And he was from the state of Maine. And I think he was sympathetic to our message about economic freedom because he saw how onerous regulations can really harm an economy. And that was really exciting.
Yeah. I think back on, like we talked, you mentioned cap and trade. I'm telling you, I think we were part of stopping cap and trade, right? Like just that grassroots, because when Obama took office, it was this, I mean, to use another German term, it was like a blitzkrieg, right? It was like, let's do this and this and this. He had a very aggressive agenda. And everybody thought at the time, man, we're probably going to end up with cap and trade. But I mean, your thoughts, Annie, about that? Like just the ability, we've stopped some really bad stuff.
That leads me to another great story.
Yeah.
So in 2007, we launched the Hot Air Tour.
Yeah.
It was a hot air balloon tour all over the country. Fun idea. It was great. We had families who would come out, kids, veterans. And we decided we were going to fly the hot air balloon, and it had this giant banner on it that said, cap and trade results in lost jobs, higher taxes, less energy, more expensive energy, something like that. And we decided we were going to fly it over Al Gore's mansion in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
So we got a permit, had the local park all lined up, sending out the news release, pitching the reporters. The day of the event, the director of the Parks Department calls us and says, no, you can't launch the balloon. And we're like, we've got a permit. You cashed the check for the permit.
Yeah.
He says, absolutely not. We show up. They had 25 police cars to greet us and wouldn't let us launch the hot air balloon. I mean, the police cars outnumbered the staff. So we found a supporter who had a farm field, and we launched that balloon and drifted over Al Gore's mansion with it. But honestly, it was a gift because we got Fox News and we got all the local press because they had actually tried to shut down our event. But I do think it caught people's attention, and our message that it was going to harm average, everyday working people with higher energy costs and lost jobs really resonated with people.
Yeah, I think of it back, like if you think of our founders, in a lot of ways, they to the British, they were kind of this ragtag group of nobodies, right? That the British thought would never challenge the crown. I almost think of AFP, and particularly the early days, that's exactly what we were. Like, I mean, you can probably really speak to that in Kansas. I mean, when AFP first started, you probably walked into the legislature and people were kind of like, who are these guys? But they definitely know who we are today.
Yeah, absolutely, they do.
But that's because you're not the state director anymore.
That's because Elizabeth is.
Yeah, I didn't want to go there, but I had to.
I'm far removed from. Yeah, that's our best state director to date for sure. They, it was interesting because it was a lot of grassroots. In some ways, is very simple, right? It's a lot of windshield time. It's getting in front of people. It's events. And so that in the Kansas chapter was critical in 2004, 2005, statewide tours and those types of things. But I do remember when I was working in the Kansas Capitol at another job, and I heard about these robocalls coming in, like all of these activists calling into the Kansas Capitol. And there's one state representative at the time that was thinking about supporting a tax increase that our state director, Alan Cobb, had on the target list to try to impact. And calls were coming in from activists into her office. And she got so upset about it, she took herself to the hospital. Like she thought, oh my gosh, because robocalls and calls coming in from activists, like it didn't happen, right? It was like they were so sheltered up there.
Yeah. Wait, we actually have to listen to our constituents and our voters?
Exactly. And so it was freaking her out so much because it was call after call of activists calling in from Johnson County, Kansas, that she took herself to the hospital because she was worried she might have a heart. I shouldn't laugh. Well, she didn't have a heart attack, but the fact that she was worried about it.
No, you shouldn't laugh.
And so ever since then, I'm like, that's the power of grassroots, man, right there.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to start with this grassroots story, and I'm going to ask, so think about this. What's your maybe most interesting grassroots story? I'm going to tell you mine. I was in Montana. I remember being in Montana, and what was the tour we did with the big gas pump? It was like the price of gas. I don't remember what it was called even. We had this big inflatable gas pump, right? That we took places.
Running on empty?
Was it running on empty?
I think it was. The Running on Empty tour.
Yeah. Excellent.
That also came to Michigan.
There you go. So I was in Billings, Montana. And Billings kind of a union town for a lot of miners and stuff there. And so we had a permit for this little shelter at a park, and we had all our food laid out and everything. And we show up, and there's nobody there. And I'm thinking, this is I don't know if anybody's going to come. We had the inflatable pump was there, it was all pumped up and everything. As soon as we walk up, all the cars from around the park, the doors just opened up and people came out. Well, they were all these union people that had planned to protest us. So we show up and it's like four of us and all of these union people who are mad at us because they think that we're anti-union and all that. And so we just kept going and said, hey, come on in, sit down, have some of our barbecue. And, pretty soon it turned into a pretty good discussion with a bunch of folks about why we believed this was important. It was going to kill jobs and things like that. It actually turned into kind of a fun event, although it was a little nerve-wracking at the beginning. So how about you? Do you have anything like that? Can you think of a story?
Two things come to mind. First of all, kind of similar. I was out in Garden City, Kansas, and which is far southwest Kansas, rented a room at a Pizza Hut, and I had a PowerPoint presentation talking about tax burden in Kansas and surrounding states and all of that. And I was ecstatic when I got there that there were already like 7 or 8 people there. Like, if you had 5 people, you were happy.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And as I started talking to everybody and, the pizzas getting served and all of that, I realized that these people had no idea that they were coming to an event. They just saw a pizza in a room and came in, and they ended up being like the only people that came to the event that we had put on.
Yeah.
So I went ahead and did the PowerPoint presentation about tax burden. And, of course, I thought it was great, but they're just kind of sitting there eating, listening politely. And then at the end of it, I start talking to him some more. And I realized that one of them was a registered Democrat who was getting ready to challenge a state representative of ours out there that was actually a really good policy champion. And then the rest of them were like his family. So it's like, well, did I convince you? And I was like, well, the answer was no, you didn't. Like, we need to raise taxes. Okay, well, enjoy your pizza, right?
Pizza's on us, huh?
So, and then of course, maybe the craziest scene I ever witnessed was, I think we all were there, the Defending the American Dream Summit that we did in DC when it was protested, and you had the blow up fat cat dolls and all that. Remember that?
Yeah.
And they were not trying to prevent us from leaving the building and everything else. That was probably the wildest scene of, my goodness, we certainly had the progressives pretty freaked out right now, don't we?
Yeah, no question.
I don't know if you remember this though, but during that big event, at a certain point, it was David Koch, and he said, I'm just going for it. And he opened the doors, walks through this giant sea of protesters with his security team. They didn't even recognize him, Jeff.
Yeah.
I mean,
he just walked through.
It was this great moment. He just walked through.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought they're misled. They don't really even know what they're protesting.
Yeah. So I have, did you have another one besides that? Do you have anything?
I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the infamous tent on the lawn of the Michigan Capitol during the Right to Work, passage of Right to Work. It was bitterly cold. And I was under the tent with a number of our activists, including a couple of people in wheelchairs. And there was just a sea of thousands of very angry protesters who were union members, and they started tearing the tent down. They had knives out. They were cutting the ropes holding up the tent, and we had to evacuate the tent. And we evacuated and went to one of the state Senate offices, and the Jimmy John's guy calls me. Get the call. I don't even know why I answered it. Probably because it didn't say Jimmy John's. And he says, hey, I've got all these sandwiches. I'm supposed to deliver them to a tent, but I don't see any tent.
Because it's gone.
And I said, the tent's gone. And he said, well, what do you want me to do with these sandwiches? I'm like, just drop them off. I gave him some offers. Just drop them off over here. And somebody got, I don't know,
a lot of free sandwiches.
70 to 100 sandwiches. But that was a really powerful moment. And, we felt like an island. I think that AFP creates a safe space for people who are like-minded. And that's really important. We hear the left talk about that a lot, but I think there's a lot of persecution aimed at people who believe in freedom-oriented policies. Yeah. And a lot of our activists, they come because they sense community. And it's, a group of people who share similar beliefs, and that makes them feel comfortable. And I think it gives them courage to find their voice too.
Yeah, I think so. And you see that, like, particularly in the area of free speech, where if they don't have that comfort or that sense that somebody will be there and agree with them, people often just don't speak. And that's a sad thing for America when we don't have that. Yep. I will tell you a funny one. We talked about the food and missing the food and having just a few people show up. I remember one time on a bus tour, I took the bus up through the corner of Colorado that goes up into Nebraska. And Brad Stevens, who was our Nebraska state director at the time, asked me, he says, well, will you just stay on it and we'll do it? Well, I was a talk show host in Colorado at the time. And I had one time, Rush Limbaugh's show was canceled because he wasn't there. So my station didn't play the Rush Limbaugh show. And instead they asked me to come in and do a show right there. And so Brad marketed this to all of his people as come meet talk show host Jeff Crank, who filled in for Rush Limbaugh, even though I didn't fill in on his show. I just filled some airtime. So I know it's crazy. So we go up and there were a few places where we had 10, 15, 20 people or whatever that showed up, but we went to one We had all the food laid out, and we're like, gosh, like nobody's showing up. Like there's nobody came. We had catered food. Nobody shows up. Well, right in there somewhere is the time zone change. And he told him it was at 12 and it was really at 11 or something. So they had all been there an hour earlier or whatever. So we had all this food and just had to kind of eat it. And, but stories like that are fun, right? That's grassroots.
That's grassroots. It's the unknown. It keeps you on your toes.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Now let's talk about some of the wins. I mean, in Michigan, you've had wins. I mean, you've had a lot of wins over the years. Talk about, and you don't have to just talk about Michigan because you worked for the national chapter as well. Your thoughts on some of the great things that AFP has been able to accomplish?
Well, I do think in those early years, we brought attention to the word earmarks. And I remember a member of Congress telling a member of our leadership, he said, no one knows what an earmark is. No one cares. No one knows what that is. And we made it a word that was known, still known. It is still known. And that's a real victory, I think, that happened very early on just by kind of building that momentum. Michigan's in a little bit of a sad place for me now. We passed right to work in 2012, and we're part of it. It was a group effort, team effort, but AFP was a big part of it. But, we saw the Whitmer administration take unified Democratic control, and their day one, Bill 1, was unfortunately getting rid of right to work. So we have unfortunately seen a lot of the battles we've won, unwound, frankly. But I think it's important to fight on. And when I look around at the grassroots in Michigan, they're tireless. And they're going to keep on going. And I know that we're going to claw back some of those wins. But over the years, we fought for checkbook transparency. We fought to pay down and better fund our teacher pension program. We'd like to see it move to more of a 401k program. But this is about protecting teachers' retirements. That's crucial for a state that we follow through on commitments by making sure that we're funding things appropriately and we're not just burdening future generations of taxpayers. That was a huge victory for us in Michigan to be able to do that. Yeah,
that's great. Derrick, how about you? What do you think some of the key victories have been?
So a couple of thoughts come to mind. First of all, we both have mentioned cap and trade back then. So let's not forget it wasn't just Obama in office, but progressives controlled both the House and the Senate. The exact landscape that we're trying to prevent from happening in January of next year. It happened in 2009. I, to this day, do not know. Well, I know it was because of grassroots, but there's still that part of me that's like, how did we actually stop cap and trade from passing? And it's because of the great grassroots capability that we had built. I still think that's one of the top 5 moments in AFP's history is being able to stop cap and trade. And then the continued fight on Obamacare, ultimately not successful, but how critical that was to us as an organization in strengthening our grassroots and bringing more and more volunteers into the organization and partnering with us. And then outside of that, I just think of all the reforms that have happened at the state level over the years. You think about worker freedom that spread across the country and some of the great things we did in states like Wisconsin with our Wisconsin state chapter and partnering with Governor Scott Walker. And I'd say more recently, just what has happened on education reform alone over the last 2-3 years in such a short period of time is truly remarkable. And all you have to do is go on social media and see how freaked out the progressives are about what we're doing on education reform to know that we're talking about societal change here.
Yeah, revolutionary stuff that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, nobody would have ever thought even a state would have done some of the great reforms that are marching across the country right now, state after state. So what about even in the Trump years? I mean, you look at once Donald Trump became president, on policy, he was pretty aligned on a lot of things. We talk about the tax cuts, which Americans for Prosperity worked very hard on, the Right to Try Act. Supreme Court justices, for the first time ever in Americans for Prosperity's history, AFP worked to get those Supreme Court justices through their confirmation process and was kind of a grassroots army having volunteers call out to constituents and have them call their senator to vote for the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch and some of the others. I mean, what about that? I mean, I think there's oftentimes we forget that when we have aligned policy champions on certain things, that's the moment to strike. It's sometimes we're playing defense and sometimes it's time to go on offense. Your thoughts on that? Yeah,
I would agree with all of that. I mean, the tax cut package in 2017, we had multiple meetings in the White House with our state directors and the president's staff. We were instrumental, and they knew how instrumental we were from a grassroots perspective in getting that passed. I also think of the work that Concerned Veterans for America did on VA reform and working with the administration. Really kind of for the first time in those years, we dipped into criminal justice reform, and the impact that we had in partnering with the president and others on the First Step Act it wouldn't have happened without us, in my opinion. So we're willing to partner with anyone, to do right. And so whether that's a Republican in office or a Democrat, we're going to try to find some common ground. But that was I think you're right. We overlook that sometimes.
Yeah.
That was an era of some significant victories.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
I do. You brought up the Supreme Court. We don't even know what victories we're going to achieve through that yet.
Yeah.
Like, we haven't seen the end of those victories.
Yeah. Or already have seen. Like, we forget it. Like, in a lot of ways, the Supreme Court over the last couple of years has kept America like from falling off the edge. It's pushed back on some of the excesses of the Biden administration. And if we hadn't been there to help that, if those justices would have been nominated maybe by a different president or something, it could be, I mean, what would happen? What would happen to our country?
I mean, the Supreme Court is generational impact.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a victory for my children who don't even vote yet.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen the dividends that's going to pay. That's a real investment. And I'd venture a guess it's really the first time a grassroots organization has ever done that.
Yeah. On the right, anyway.
On the right, yes.
Yeah, I think those on the left have done it for a long time.
They're pretty good at it.
But I think that is probably the first time. I guess it would be Neil Gorsuch was the first of those three that did that. And you mentioned this, and I'd love to hear either of your thoughts on it. But like the Mission Act that the Concerned Veterans for America worked on, doing to VA healthcare what we talk about in education. I always try to make the comparison there that, in education, we're for parents being able to decide what school is best for their kids. And that's what we're talking about with the Mission Act and other reforms at VA, is not just forcing them into a government-run system that they may or may not like, but giving that veteran the opportunity and the choice. I mean, that's revolutionary stuff. Any thoughts?
I mean, this is a free people.
Yeah.
Is a good thing. Giving people the freedom to choose is vitally, vitally important. And what we do is we highlight that we can trust people to make those decisions. We can trust parents. We can trust veterans to make the right decisions for their situation. And that looks different for everybody. And I think it's a recognition of the diversity of the choices people need to make or what the best choice is. That's what these liberty-minded solutions provide to veterans, to our families.
Yeah.
Because everyone's situation isn't the same. Anyone with kids knows every child is completely different from the other one. Yeah. I mean, I wish that sometimes there were a template, but there's not.
There's not.
So, but that's why freedom is a blanket that covers everybody. Mm-hmm. It gives people the flexibility to make decisions that fit them, that fit their situation. And all throughout our lives, right? You're free to choose what kind of bread you buy at the store, what kind of car you drive. But yet we see government, which is a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't respect or believe in the choices that people should be free to make.
Yeah. You talk about the kind of bread that you buy. I mean, they're literally, if we recall back in New York City and many cities, they were deciding you couldn't have a 16-ounce soda to drink, right? It had to be smaller than that because it wasn't good for you. Or we talk about the Biden administration deciding for Americans what kind of energy we should use, what kind of car we should drive. These are decisions that are best made by individuals making those decisions, not governments doing it. Okay, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask, And I always start with Derrick. I'd rather put him on. I'll give you a minute to think about it, Annie, because I like you more, quite honestly. But let's talk about, okay, give me the what's the best, funniest thing you can think of that's happened at your time at AFP? Just like, come on, Derrick, you're a funny guy. You got to give me the best story you have.
I mean, it's
there's probably a lot
tough
to choose
to share
from.
some.
Yeah.
It is tough.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's going to have to get by the lawyers, but that's
not
okay.
that they're inappropriate, but it's tough. Yeah, you put me on the spot there. I'll have to. I mean, I'll have to try to think of a particular instance, but I will say it does speak a lot to our culture because the funniest moments have been spent with my teammates and coworkers over the years, right? Whether it's been on the bus tours or on tours of some sort, or at retreats like what we're doing here over the next couple of days. Those are the moments where, we get together and provide a lot of stories from the grassroots that can be comical. But yeah, I'd have to think about it. One that I would be willing, and let me put it that way, willing to share on this platform.
Well, how about I'll throw this out. You remember this. I don't know if you were around. I guess you were. I mean, I'm known as the P card guy. Right?
You are, yeah.
Because when I was the chief operating officer, and by the way, I looked at the list of the longest serving staff members.
Yeah.
And I'm the third longest serving. Yeah. You're the second longest. And James Valvo is the longest serving. And it just dawned on me today that if when I was COO, I would have fired you and Valvo, then I could be the king of the hill right now. But I didn't have the foresight to do that. I never thought you would last that long, quite honestly. You know what I mean? Anyway, but remember when I was the P card guy and we actually we were putting all of our expenses at the beginning. We were a truly grassroots organization, right? We didn't have the systems built out of a normal company to do these things. And so we were charging these things and putting them on our credit cards. You remember that?
Racking up Amex points. I remember that well.
Yeah.
I remember my husband telling me it had to stop.
It has to stop.
He said, no more.
Yeah. I mean, literally, how much money would you have on your credit card?
I remember I had to do a radio buy once, get it turned around quickly. And I remember one month where it was like a $10,000 reimbursement.
Yeah, that you put on your personal credit card.
On my Amex, yeah.
Yes, this causes marital stress. Yeah. How about you? Do you remember what was like, how much did you have on your credit card at one point?
Over 15 grand.
Yeah.
I had to put
that's amazing.
A mobile stage unit. And it was like,
a mobile stage.
What is a mobile?
It's like a stage they roll up on like a big truck. Yeah. And they set it up. It was for a speaker and an audio system. And it was like $7,000. Plus I had other stuff on there from like other
and
events.
It does cause your spouse to look at the credit card. What is $7,000? I mean, what is a mobile stage unit?
This is at the same time we're under threat of IRS audit. And my husband's like, what happens if they freeze AFP's resources?
We were just trying to save the country, man. You got to do what you got to do.
Got to do what you got to do.
A lot of points, though. A lot of points. But
we got all that fixed. And,
you did.
it got, well, I
Thanks
didn't,
to
but we
you.
did.
No,
you did. We got it fixed.
You made it happen almost overnight.
That was fun. That's a whole nother story. We'll tell that in the blooper reel, that story.
That's right.
But that's great. Well, listen, thanks. I appreciate you both joining me. It's been an honor and a privilege working with both of you throughout the years. To me, I will just say this. To me, I love the fact that I have gotten to do what I love doing for the last, many years. And AFP has provided that for us, right? For people who love liberty and freedom and fighting for freedom and liberty, there's just not a lot of places where you can actually go and do that for a living, right? Some people love being accountants. I don't know why you would, but some people do. Some people love being doctors or lawyers or doing their craft. But we love liberty and freedom, and we love fighting for it. And it's like, don't you feel that way? It's just been an honor to be able to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no other place I'd rather be. And any time in the last 15 years, the rare instances where I've thought about doing something else or going somewhere else, I would always come back and ask myself the question, where else can you have the kind of difference or make the kind of difference that you make here on the things that are important to you?
Yeah.
And the answer has always been, and I suppose always will be, there's no other place like it.
Yeah. So in other words, you weren't going to leave on your own. I probably should have gotten rid of you.
I'm not self-selecting.
Yeah, right. How about you, Annie?
I mean, I think AFP is like a family in a lot of ways. And, we look out for each other and we've got each other's backs, and you develop a real strong bond and closeness with your colleagues.
Yeah, I've always said, and I think it's the culture here, and culture does matter when you work for a place. Like we've all worked at some employer before where the culture's not that great. And you got that backstabbing employee, or you got the person that's, honestly, I can't think of one person in the whole time I've been here. Well, maybe one. No, I'm kidding. I can't think of one person the whole time who had it out for me. Like said, I'm just, not good. It's just a culture. There's a respectful culture. There's a culture that we're all in this. We're fighting for the same thing. And I mean, that's a great thing to do every day, is wake up and get to do that. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you both. Thanks for all you've done for me, for AFP, but for America. Thanks for fighting for America.
Thank you, Jeff. Means a lot coming from you.
All right, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Well, listen, thanks again for listening to this episode of American Potential. And as I said, it's been an honor. It's been an honor to fight with these two guests who I've had, and so many others at Americans for Prosperity, who we've been able to do some things. And I said, we were just kind of this ragtag bunch at the beginning, and have developed into a real force for freedom and liberty. And it's been one of the great honors that I've had in my life, is to be able to be a part of that. And I just use it as an example. I've always told my kids, do whatever it is you love and you'll be successful at it. And I think this is a great example. I think this organization has been successful because everybody in it is doing this out of a labor of love. They love liberty and they love freedom. So as I often in this show go out and fight and defend liberty and defend freedom, it's precious. You can't take it for granted, and you can't not defend liberty and freedom, because if you don't defend it, we will soon lose liberty and freedom for our children and our grandchildren. We can't ever let that happen. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.